A pleasant day to everyone. I am Erlyn Lopez, your humble host for today's podcast first episode. And this is Voters Education, where I discuss the importance of voting, the appropriate voting methods, and other factors that pertain to suffrage. I hope that you'll be able to learn with me to be an informed citizen of the Philippines. So, stay tuned, sit back and relax because your vote matters. According to the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education. As a responsible citizen, we have the right to vote. Based on the 1987 Philippine Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, suffrage may be exercised by all citizens of the Philippines, not otherwise disqualified by law, who are at least 18 years of age and who shall have resided in the Philippines for at least 1 year and win the place wherein they propose to vote for at least 6 months immediately preceding the election. No literacy, property, or other substantive requirements shall be imposed on the exercise of suffrage. Therefore, elections are essential and your vote is significant. Elections should be free and fair, so you must choose wisely and be a responsible citizen. What are the qualifications to be able to register? A person is allowed to vote if he or she is at least 18 years of age on or before the election. 1-year residency in the Philippines and at least 6 months residency in the barangay on or before the election should be considered. And he or she is not otherwise disqualified by the law. Who are the persons that are not allowed to register? Any person who has been sentenced by final judgment to suffer imprisonment for not less than 1 year. Any person who has been adjudged by final judgment of having committed any crime involving disloyalty to the duly constituted government or any crime against national security. And lastly, an insane or incompetent person is not allowed to vote. The Commission on Elections is the principal government agency tasked by the Constitution to enforce and administer all laws and regulations concerning regular and special elections. It is a body that is designed to be constitutionally independent of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government to ensure the conduct of free, fair, and honest elections. Voting is important, and it is considered as an obligation of a particular country. The law itself does not require citizens to vote, but voting serves a relevant part in developing a democratic country. Through voting, citizens are able to voice out their rights and obligations and contributing to the overall population in a country. These are the needed requirements to register under the new normal setup. You'll be needing face mask, face shield, ball pen, and also filled up application form from irehistro.comelec.gov.ph. The general requirements include are a photocopy of any valid ID with your picture and address. Unaccepted ID by the COMELEC can be a company ID, school ID, driver's license, postal ID, senior citizens ID, UMID, PRC ID, TIN ID, NBI clearance, birth certificate for verification purposes, and other government-issued ID that is valid. The registration process. First, applicants will personally appear before the EO with identification documents. Second is the verification of voters' inclusion in the local voters registration database or printed list of voters' PLBs and printed list of the activated voters. Third is to accomplish the application forms front to back in 3 copies. And lastly, the designated person will encode a person's demographics and applicant's biometrics data and also take a note before the EO, EA, and secure acknowledgement receipt. According to the United Nations, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures. Elections make a fundamental contribution to democratic governance, because direct democracy is a form of government in which political decisions are made directly by the entire body of qualified citizens, and it is impractical in most modern societies. Democratic government must be conducted through representatives. Elections enable voters to select leaders and to hold them accountable for their performance in office. Elections also reinforce the stability and legitimacy of the political community, like national holidays commemorating common experiences. Elections link citizens to each other and thereby confirm the viability of the polity. As a result, elections help to facilitate social and political integration. Finally, elections serve a self-actualizing purpose by confirming the worth and dignity of individual citizens as human beings. Whatever other needs voters may have, participation in an election serves to reinforce their self-esteem and self-respect. Elections are also important because it customizes the government. It protects us against dictators and tyrannies, and it prevents stagnation of the country. Elections are important, and your individual vote is truly important. Elections have to be done in a certain way. They have to be free and fair. In choosing, you can use decision criteria proposed by various groups like PPCRB or the Parish Pastoral Council for responsible voting. It is a non-partisan, non-sectarian, non-profit organization affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church in the Philippines that works to ensure free, fair, and fraud-free elections in the Philippines. These are the tremendous cases of electoral fraud and offenses that is under the violations of election law. First, vote buying and selling. It is an act that is done in order to induce anyone or the public in general to vote for or against any candidate or withhold his vote in the election. This practice is often used to incentivize or persuade voters to turn out to elections and vote in a particular way. Vote buying occurs when a political party or candidate seeks to buy the vote of a voter in an upcoming election. Vote buying can take various forms, such as a monetary exchange, as well as an exchange for necessary goods or services. It can fall onto vote buying and selling if the offender gives offers or promises money or anything of value, gives or promises any office or employment, franchise or grant, public or private, and cause an expenditure to be made to any person, association, corporation, entity, or community. This can be practiced by means of house-to-house buying in many parts of the country. Candidates pay as much as 1,000 to 1,500 pesos, while other groceries and goods are given during the campaign rallies. Vote buying and selling is punishable by the law under the Republic Act No. 6646 or the Electoral Reforms Law of 1987. Threats, intimidation, terrorism, use of fraudulent device or other forms of coercion. It is an act that intimidates or actually causes, inflicts, or produces any violence, injury, punishment, damage, loss, or disadvantage upon any person or persons or that of the immediate members of his family, his honor, or property. That the purpose is to compel or induce the registration of any voter, or the participation in a campaign, or refraining or desistance from any campaign, or the casting of any vote or omission to vote, or any promise of such registration, campaign, vote, or emission therefrom. Unlawful electioneering. It is an act that the offender solicits votes or undertakes any propaganda. This was done on the day of registration before the Board of Election Inspectors and on the day of election for or against any candidate and political party. Done within the polling place and within a radius of 30 meters. This is punishable by the law under Section 261, soliciting of votes or undertaking any propaganda within the polling place or within the radius of 30 meters thereof if the following elements are present. A. That the offender solicits votes or undertakes any propaganda for or against any candidate and political party. B. That the act was done on the day of election and that the act was done within polling place or within a radius of 30 meters thereof. Conspiracy to bribe voters. If there are two or more persons, whether candidates or not, and that the offenders come to an agreement concerning the commission of any violation of paragraph A on vote buying and vote selling of Section 261 and decide to commit it. Remember that conspiracy to commit a crime is not to be confused with conspiracy as a means to commit a crime. Use of public funds and equipments. Use of public funds, money deposited in trust, equipment, facilities owned or controlled by the government for an election campaign is punishable by the law. Intervention of public officers and employees. The persons liable include any officer or employee in the civil service except those holding political offices. Any officer, employee, or member of the armed forces of the Philippines or any police force, special forces, home defense forces, barangay self-defense units, and all other paramilitary units that now exist or which may hereafter be organized. It can also be a violation if the offender directly or indirectly intervenes in any election campaign or engages in any partisan political activity except to vote or to preserve public office. If he is a peace officer. Tampering of voters' application for registration. It is a violation if the offender tampers with or changes without authority any data or entry in any voter's application for registration. Transfer of officers and employees in the civil service. It is the fact of transfer or detail of public officer or employee within the election period as fixed with the COMELEC and was affected prior approval of the COMELEC. Gun ban violations. It is the act of carrying, transporting firearms under the Section 261 of the Omnibus Election Code BP BLG 881 and Section 32 of Republic Act No. 7166. It is under carrying firearms outside residence or place of any business, if any person who, although possessing a permit to carry firearms, carries any firearms outside his residence or place of business during the election period unless authorized in writing by the Commission, provided that a motor vehicle, water, or aircraft shall not be considered a residence or place of business of extension hereof. And to sum it all up, voting in substitution for another. It is also punishable by the law. It is considered a violation if the offender votes in substitution for another, whether with or without the latter's knowledge and or consent. What is the penalty of an election offense? Number 1. With imprisonment of not less than 1 year, but not more than 6 years, and shall not be subject to probation. In addition, the guilty party shall be sentenced to suffer disqualification to hold public office and deprivation of the right of suffrage. Under Section 264 of Omnibus Election Code, except for a special election offense known as electoral sabotage, which is punishable with life imprisonment under Section 42 of RA number 9369. And that's all for 4 episodes of this podcast. Always remember that your vote certainly matters. Thanks for joining me. This has been Voters Education. Thank you for listening. I'm Erlyn Lopez, wishing you a happy podcasting.